Going to start recording.
Don't start just yet.
Oops,
Oh,
I
there
just
we go.
started.
Okay. Okay. I was having trouble with the advancing, of course, as always. Now, are you seeing a bar at the top, or are you just seeing my whole screen?
We are seeing your whole screen. So it
Okay.
looks good from here, Kim.
Okay. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to Sandy Point and a little bit on seals. I will say that in doing this, putting together this month's presentation, the landscape, it looks a lot like this, kind of brown with a lot of texture. So I found a little bit frustrating that I couldn't get a lot of the views that I like because I just couldn't get the depth in my camera. So I relied early on, at least, with my usual photo maps. So on the left here is the old stone wall map. And I love this map for many reasons. One of which is evident here is that the drawings showing the dunes and the landscape details are really great. Whether it's a wetland or in this case the dunes. And then I have found this other map is a little bit more modern, but I like this one because it's showing a lot of the roads that were in use a lot. And this is roughly where Settlers Rock would be, and then there were roads and sort of a turnaround, and the Old Town Road went along the backside of Saucon Pond and along the whole West Beach. So those are interesting to note. There are a few places where they're still evident, uh, but um, but not so much anymore. It's mostly just sand. And then here's a close-up just to point out a few things that I'm going to talk about as we go along. First of all, the road is, it's a fairly narrow strip between the ocean and Saucon Pond. And then this is where the the North Light is, and it's shown over on this map by little square. And then this is showing a very sandy area covered, surrounded by dunes. That's what the hatch marks are. This area in the old days used to be known as the Sugar Bowl because it was a deep white sand, very soft sand area, like a sugar bowl. Today it's a little bit more vegetated, but it's still really sandy. And there was a road that came out to the North Light and then goes sort of by this, and you had to be careful not to get stuck in the sugar bowl. The other thing to note in these is just, again, this road, which is no longer evident at all, that went around Saucon Pond. Today's talk is really about this portion of Saucon Pond and the whole dune sandy area, Sandy Point ecosystem. This is kind of the trail that I'll be annotating as we go along, and with today's Google map, starting at the parking lot, going along the edge, going around the point, and then coming up through the middle of the point till we get to the North Light. Just a little jog down to West Beach here, and then back up out the traditional road, and then a little loop through this. I'm going to call it a sand dune plain. It's really much wider, and to me, one of the more interesting areas that doesn't get a lot of visibility. So you'll notice also there's a lot of, this is representing Phragmites, so it's very wet but not open water. And just to do some real close-ups of the aerial, this of course is the very tip, Sandy Point. And we'll be sort of coming in just like this, going up the middle. And this is the middle section. This is the walkway that I mentioned that goes out to West Beach that I'll show you. This is where the Sugar Bowl is. And you can see a lot of vegetation is filled in, but there's still quite a bit of open white sand in here. And it's soft sand, it's movable, it's always shifting around. And then this is the main roadway that many of you may have walked out before. And you can still see the remnants of this circular driveway, although this is clearly not used anymore, but there it is right there. You can see it. And then this is another walkway that you can take out to West Beach from the North Light. And then the back part, again, here's the road that you would go from North Light down to the beach. And then we're going to kind of come and wander around in here a little bit before we go back out. And again, here's the Phragmites. And this, probably should have pointed out earlier, this is a really interesting sandy area that's almost connected to the West Beach area. It's a little off screen here, but this is when you look across from Corneck across Saucon Pond, you can see this sort of alluvial plain of sand that is being pushed into Saucon Pond. So here we'll start. You have to start getting to Sandy Point by going down the neck, and you go by Saucon Pond. And on this particular day, it was cold and frozen. And this is that sandy area I was just talking about. That's a sort of a low area headed over to the other side of the dune, which is West Beach. And then this is part of that dune plain leading up to the and you can actually see, if you can see the depth, that this right along here, this sort of tawny color, that represents, that's the Phragmites that's right along up in that corner of the pond. This is the pond unfrozen, same basic view, a little bit farther out. So you can see here again, there's that sandy spot coming in from the other side, the plains, and then the Phragmites, and then the North Lighthouse in the distance. And this was a cold day, but not frozen, because the way the pond was just too choppy. So this is we're ready to head our way out in the North Light at Sandy Point. And the old timers on Black Island don't like it when you call this Settlers Rock area. I mean, Settlers Rock is there, but the area is Sandy Point. It's got a greeting right away from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and a little bit later I'll talk to you a little bit about that. The land, most of the land out here is owned by the town, but there's a big chunk that's owned by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and that'll come somewhat clearer as we go along. But beautiful cobbly beach this time of year, and you'll see many places throughout the presentation. Again, it's the texture of the landscape that just gets me. Look at those, rock, and then smaller rock, and seaweed rock, and ocean, quite beautiful in its form. And there it is, starting out very cobbly. Here's right away you see a short bit after you pass the U.S. Fish and Wildlife sign, you see this put in place by the North Light Interpretive Center. Hopefully it will be open again this year. The last few years it hasn't been open because of COVID, and the not easy to get staffing out there. So, and there it is, just a little bit closer. So as we go out, there's a dune that separates Saucon Pond from the ocean shoreline. So on one side you see the dune going towards Saucon, and the other side the dune going with the going to the shoreline. And then if you get a little panoramic view, it kind of looks something like this. It's hard to get in 2D what your eye is seeing in 3D, but it's quite an amazing ecosystem. And very important, this whole structure, this dune structure, cobbles and the dune and the vegetation that holds the dune is critical to protecting the inland part of Black Island from the ocean storms. And it's sort of interesting to note that the cobbles stay uncovered and act as their own sort of barricade to the sort of the footing of the dune formation. Lots of things you can find along this stony beach, critters galore. Most of them, I will say that most of the critters today are have been washed up, And in this case, it's a green crab and a purple sea urchin. A lot of times you don't find sea urchins so intact. Most of the times their spines have already broken off. If you look at from a distance, this is the top, the dorsal side, and you see that star shape right there. That's typical of the echinoderms. Sea urchins are part of the sea star uh, group, and they all have that 5-point sort of symmetry. So it's quite a beautiful little object. Another great birds of the area, the common eider. And the common eider actually are diving birds, but they don't eat fish. They eat mussels and sea urchins. And it's amazing. You can sort of really see it in this male eider, the little hook on that bill for prying the sea urchins off the bottom or the mussels off of the bottom. And I recently saw a film where it shows the eider eating the sea urchins, and they just swallow it down whole like I don't know, like a prickly ping pong ball. I can't imagine how they get it swallowed, but they do, and they eat lots of them. This is another bird that we see a lot in this part of the ocean this time of year. This is a northern gannet, or it was a northern gannet. They have these long, they're all white. They're plunge diving birds, and they dive headfirst into the ocean for fish. They're all white with these black wingtips, and the best way to see these is on the boat, on the ferry to and from Block Island, going along and just diving. Sometimes you'll see them around a fishing boat out there. You can just see the splashes coming up from where they hit the water. It's a very powerful bill that they can use to spear and grab fish. And they're wonderful. They can swim underwater with these wings. This is a ocean-going bird and spends most of his time in the ocean. In wintertime, in rough weather, razorbills can end up on land and in Block Island's area. So I've actually recently seen razorbills in Point Judith as well as Block Island swimming. This one again is obviously has been washed up, but it has this interesting bill. This is in the auk family. So this is closely related to what would have been the great auk, which of course has gone extinct and is much bigger. But in the old books, this is actually called a razorbill auk. Today we just call it a razorbill. So back to our map again, just to show we're going along this thin strip of land. And I've put in a couple of versions. If you look at this old one, it's depicted that there's just a thin strip of land. Geologically, this is called a tombolo, which is basically a sandbar that connects two parts of the land mass, and they're usually very narrow. In this photograph, this is a Google Earth photo from 1995, and what is really cool is this pronunciation, this little peninsula. This is all sand that was pushed into Saucon Pond in the 1991, what we call the no-name storm, or some people call the Halloween storm, or the perfect storm. And Saucon Pond was breached then, and it ran tidal for about a day and a half, and then it sealed up with the sand. But most of the dune, and it was a very extensive dune, the road was actually behind the dune, between the dune and Saucon Pond. After the 91 storm, the road was not there anymore. All the sand that had been that dune had been pushed towards the pond and made this little peninsula. If you walked out there now, and here it is now, it's been vegetated in that time period, and has been sort of its edges have been modified. But you see all along here, this is all evidence of the sand being pushed into Saucon Pond, as opposed to how it was depicted in 1896 or so. But if you walked out to the edge of here, you would find that the slope into the water was very steep. because the sand just filled in. It wasn't like a gradual slope. It just filled in and was like quickly dropped to 3 feet because that was the depth of the water at that point before all the sand filled in. So pretty much that whole dune ended up right in this area. And that becomes very important in a little bit further on in the discussion because it's opening up this great sand plain between the shoreline on the back of the dune and the Saucon Pond. So here you start to get a look at it a little bit. And we're looking here, we're just looking how wide this sand plain is. This is that area from, from my from my 5-foot level as opposed to the aerial photos. And again, another panoramic view that shows how narrow the beach is compared to all the sand that has filled in since 1991 and made this in 91, and you could really see it still in 95. This was much barren sand. But the vegetation, which is so important to our dune systems, has really settled in and stabilized the area so that we now have all the vegetation that we usually see in a dune system. Primarily in this area, it's Rosa rugosa, beach rose. And in case you haven't had experience with Rosa rugosa, it's quite thorny and you don't easily go through that, but it becomes very effective, as you can see here, with the stems and the roots collecting the sand and helping the dune to build up. So we'll turn our attentions back to the shoreline. Again, the texture, the arc of the shore is quite wonderful here. This is pretty low tide. You'll notice lots of things going along. There we have a gull. Again, the texture, the shape, the form, it's amazing. But spring is the time for green algae to start growing. So earlier in this winter, if you'd looked at these rocks, they wouldn't be green like this. Green is, algae is a plant. It's just not a vascular plant. And it does need sunlight. It does have chlorophyll, so it does photosynthesize. So it can't be too deep in the water column. And the rocks in all the places that green algae grow around the island are just starting to green up. And for within a month from now, it'll look bright green. And you can see it at places like Spring Street, the rocks there. Anywhere where you can see the rocky shoreline, you'll suddenly see it's being edged with this wonderful spring green that we think of on land, but we don't often think of at the rocky intertidal zone. And amazing stuff. Of course, there's lots of other critters in the area, gulls primarily, and the bufflehead is a duck, little duck that loves to ride the waves. Okay, back to our map. This is a photo of our town plat map. So it shows the platting of the island. And this area, there's this parcel here, number 16, is town of New Shoreham sanded beaches. What do they call it? Land and beaches is what they call this lot, and it runs almost all the way to it's 95 acres and runs almost all the way to the entry to the Great Salt Pond. And here you'll see they've called this beach plum. I forget what the next word is, but it's beach plum dune or something like that, because there's a lot of beach plum in here. This land is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife land, if I have it correctly. And this land is where the North Light is now owned by the town. Now, if I recall correctly, this used to be owned by the Coast Guard, part of the U.S. government. And when the North Light Commission was formed and the town took over the ownership of the North Light for its restoration, it traded this for an easement over here, and this says conservation easement. There's an easement, 20-acre easement. It's not well depicted. It's in this area that is owned by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And so that connects in a way, something like this, some weird shape. connects to this part of the land that is U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So it is protected land, but it's in different ownership. So as you go out around throughout this walk, you're periodically going to see signs like this: National Wildlife Refuge. And at this time of year, there is deer hunting in the area. So if it is winter time, I do not suggest taking the walk that I'm taking during a weekday, because there may be hunting. Of course, weekends there are no hunting on Block Island, and holidays. So I don't know how much hunting actually happens out here, but it is an area that is hunted. And these signs are just about, they're just about right here, right where the property changes hands. And this, of course, is, well, this is part of the old road. The real road comes more like that now. So here's where we're getting to, down towards the sort of the narrow part of Sandy Point, the point part of Sandy Point, and back going towards, of course, its main sort of human element is the North Light. This is the road that goes up to the North Light. But the reason I put this in here is to show this big dune. This big dune has been forming for, obviously decades, longer than that. It used to be not so big, but the way things are, it is starting to build, and vegetation is established, and it's building up even more. So I put this photo in here just to show this big dune that's forming. And there is a person here, so it gives you a sense of scale for that photo. So we've come along, and we're just, there used to be a sign on this that said North Light or something. Now it's just the post. I'm sure it'll get replaced in the spring. And the road goes up this way. If you go a little bit further, you start to get alongside of that dune I was just talking about. And you can just see it's tall. You can just see the North Light poking up over the top of it. And you keep going and start to see various artifacts or evidence of human involvement. This is some kind of post. It was probably a stake, a corner stake or building stake of some part. The island used to be, this dune used to be much farther out. You can see it takes a lot of erosion and activity from the storm. This is about the highest the rack line is showing right here, but that's pretty high. And of course, wind and wind-driven sand is one of the most erosive forces that Block Island faces, whether you're on a small dune like this, which causes dunes to, quote, migrate or move inland, or the face of the bluffs at both Clay Head and the Mohegan Bluffs are abraded and eroded hugely by wind-driven sand. So we're going north this way, and there's the post. And if you turn around, look from whence we've come, you can look back towards the parking area and see the post there. Again, you get a sense of the scale of that giant dune that's building up there. We make our way a little bit farther, and I start to notice the black sand. Block Island has a lot of black sand in various places, and when it's tinged a little reddish, as I hope you can make out in both of these photos, that red tinge is garnet. And it's a gemstone that's abraded down into fine particles, but it will give that sort of reddish hue. And this is magnetic. It's an iron type of iron, and it's very small particle compared to the white sand that you can see below it. So it tends to be it's lighter, so it tends to be on the top where it is, where if it blows, you can really see sort of the white sand underneath, and sort of this nice little sugar coating of black iron sand with its tinge of garnet. And you can see that everywhere on Block Island. It's not just the north, not just the Sandy Point area. You can see this on the East Beach and any of the beaches around the island. If there's sand, if the the material has been aggregated such that the big stuff is below, like the cobbles, the boulders, and then the cobbles, and then the coarser sand, and then the black sand on top. I can never resist sort of the patterns that are visible along the beach. And this is looking at the white sand, again, very much sculpted by the wind, these little sort of barring here, and then the blowing the beach grass around in these circles, making this, this just wonderful sort of pockmarked pattern on the landscape. But we do start to see evidence of human activity. This right out of the middle of the halfway down this dune face is this cable, this frayed cable that is sticking out. You go a little bit farther and you look into the grassy dune, you can see this concrete slab. And so we're going to see many things that are evidence of human use. But for the most part, we're headed to Sandy Point. And there it is in all of its various glory, splashing riptides. That's the only place on Block Island you really should not swim. You do not swim at Sandy Point because of the riptide, the rip current, where the current comes up on both sides of the island, right up to the tip of Sandy Point, and the waves smash, and it draws, and then it curves away and draws the person offshore. So a very dangerous place to be in the water, but a beautiful place to look at. The bigger the swell, the bigger the sort of eruption of white foam, and it's fun to look at. This was a mild day, but I've seen it quite fierce, and I don't know. I guess I'm Block Islander at heart because I think the fiercer it is, the more beautiful it is. So Sandy Point has animals of various types. We've seen some gulls, but it also has often a good place to find a snowy owl. This one was taken last year out there, but out there on that little spit, you'll also see gulls kind of dashing around the water and seals. Mostly the seals are gray. Most of the animals out here are seals, and most of them are gray seals. And it's one of the two most prevalent species that you see on Block Island. Harbor seals tend to be seen more in the Great Salt Pond or over on behind the Harbor Church or off of the island. Not the Harbor Church, sorry, the Catholic Parish Center up on Spring Street. But on Sandy Point, it's gray seals. And we had a visitor, Martin Creel, has taken some really lovely pictures of seals hanging out at Sandy Point. Gray seals are, we believe that probably the new abundance of gray seals in the winter is sort of maybe, I wouldn't say a colony, but a bachelor pad, a place that's hanging out where subadults are hanging out in the winter. It could grow into a colony. Like up in the Cape and off of Nantucket is where the main pupping colonies are for gray seal. On the left there, you do see a pup that was from last year. And so we do see the pups. I haven't seen or had any reports of pups this year. It's really amazing. Gray seal pups are birthed on land. Their mother stays with them for 2 weeks on land. So when you run into them, you don't want to run into them. You have to give them wide berth because the mother will not leave for 2 weeks, and the pup will suckle and get all of its nutrition for 2 weeks, and then that's it. She's done. The mother goes off into the ocean, and so does the baby, and it's on its own from there on. So it's a tough life, but they've been doing it for eons. And I sort of doubt that Block Island will become a colony for pupping, but I hope and think that it will continue to grow as a sort of the bachelor pad, the hangout colony for subadults. Seals have been making a big comeback since since the Marine Protection Act made it illegal to kill them. And so who could kill a face like that? So leaving the point, we're going to turn around, and if you're turning around and looking to the east, this is the view. If you look straight down the point towards the light, this is the view. This right here, and then if you look on the other side of the point down to the west, this is the view. And we're going to be making our way up through the middle towards the north light and this way. And you right away see an interesting little outbuilding. I'm not sure what this was. I believe it dates from the era when the Coast Guard was present on Block Island. And I'm not sure if it was a generator house or storage of some sort or housed some kind of communications, but it's clearly cement with steel reinforcements. And the Coast Guard ran, of course, the lighthouse for many, many, a century or so. And at the end, it was an automated light run by batteries. Of course, it had a very romantic beginning where kerosene run lights in the late 1800s, but I digress. Moving our way up towards this peninsula, and this is where you start to get a sense of what Sandy Point ecosystem is really about. It's about this sort of hummocky terrain of sand and vegetation that makes wonderful habitat, and it's just very unique ecosystem for Block Island because of the expanse of the dune system. Here it's very narrow, of course, but you're starting to get a sense of what this is like. Of course, these dunes can't stay in place without vegetation to hold them. I already talked about that a little bit with the Rosa rugosa, but it's not the only one. The primary sort of first beach stabilizing plant is the American beach grass. And this is it when it's new and put out its seed heads, say at the end of the summer. And this is what it looks like when it's been ravaged by wind at the end of the winter. All this seed head has just been beaten down, and you're down to the lowest part of the stem, and it's been completely frayed into these sort of tufts of frayed beach grass. Again, I often say when you look at things closely, you see just how beautiful they are and what their structure is like. This is another very important plant holding the dune in place, and this is bayberry. And again, just like in the Rosa rugosa, you see how the sand is catching in the stems and building up, and the plant just keeps growing up above it, leaving this sort of mesh of roots and a tangle of old vegetation that is helping to stabilize the dunes. We've come across in this area, there's another set. This is actually looking more or less, would be going west, looking west, and you see these two signs, U.S. Fish and Wildlife signs, sort of at right angles to each other. Get a little closer, you can see they are marking the corner. I'm not exactly sure which corner they're marking, but unlike most of the signs that say U.S. Fish and Wildlife or National Wildlife Refuge, this one has a survey marker right there. So this is definitely a boundary point. Some of the other signs are just meant to be instructive that this is wildlife land. This is showing where there's an actual bounded out or surveyed out corner of the land between, probably I would say between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife land and the town lot, which is now the Coast Guard or the North Light. Hard to tell. There's several of these around. I sort of wonder if anybody who put in most of the signs knew where they were or not. But we keep going, and we're starting to come up closer to the lighthouse, and you start to see, where there's grass and where there's sand. And this is this is the edge of what we talked about, what I mentioned before, as part of the sugar bowl. You can just make out over here a rope line. actually the old road used to go right along there, and this was all very sandy. And there's many old tales I've heard from old Black Islanders about driving out to Sandy Point and getting stuck in the sugar bowl. And I will point out in the distance more structures. That little sort of corral turns out to have a big red hand. I think that meant stop. I think maybe I wasn't supposed to be there. But I was, and I looked at the end of this corral, and this is a cable of some sort that's going underneath the dune, and we saw the other end of that cable earlier in the presentation. It goes right through the dune and comes out, and it's just that severed off piece of cable. I'm sure that not electric cable, that would have been a communication cable of some sort. So again, connected to the lighthouse. Again, looking a little closer now, you can see that little corral. You can see the hand a little bit more there, the stop hand that's so faded, it's not red anymore. And then you start to notice this little pile of stones, like cobbles, as we approach the North Light. And once you get closer, you see how intentional this is. These cobbles were put in place. These are all Block Island beach stones. They are built in place around 1872. This lighthouse was built in 67, and they were having a terrible time with erosion and the shifting sands undermining the structure, fear of that it would be undermining the structure. And from experience with some of the other lighthouses, which I'll get to in a second, they felt that if they put out this cobble apron, it would help in some way to stabilize the land so that the erosion and wouldn't be so severe that it would threaten the building itself. And, I would say that 150 years later, with having had nearly nothing done to it, it's doing a pretty good job, and is helping. And it's not, I'm sure they're using the same kind of theory as what we saw earlier, where the high cables to sort of be the buffer to help stabilize the area. So if anybody can guess why I took this photo, because it had a bird in it, a song sparrow. It was pretty quiet out there for land birds this particular day, but perched right up on this edge of the stump was this song sparrow. So that's why I couldn't get away without doing a in situ bird. So turning our attention back to the lighthouse, this lighthouse was built, as it says, in 1867, and it's the fourth one. There were two, the second lighthouse was built, the first lighthouse was built northerly of this light in 1829, and it quickly was completely compromised by the ocean and by the wind and by the sand, and actually had to be torn down. They sold the structure at auction for materials, and it was demolished. Then the second one they built further to the south than the existing structure, and that proved to be too far south and too far away from the ocean to be an effective at preventing shipwrecks, because the light wasn't seen far enough in advance, and the space between it and the coast was thought to be greater than it actually was. So the one that was to the south of this was taken down, and then a third one was built north of this, and that also succumbed to severely shifting sands until finally the one in 1867 was built and is still there today. And I'm just now seeing the typo in there, so sorry about that. So now, if you were to go up to if you're in the northwest corner of the lighthouse, and you'll get a better view of this in a moment, you would find this path, I pointed out on the map, that will take you out to the beach. And here's that line I pointed out earlier. Again, we're looking at the area that was the Sugar Bowl. The old road used to go like right across there. You can sort of see a little bit of remnants of it. So just to get a sense of the it's hard to really depict the sort of the how much undulation there is in this landscape. But you take the path and it will get you out onto the West Beach, what I call West Beach, but this area is actually on the early maps as Logwood Cove. And I guess that looks like it might be aptly named given those logs out there on the beach. If you turn around, you see if you turn around from where you were on the beach, or just before you got to the beach, and look to the east, you see another set of wildlife signs. If you looked south, the North Light would be over here. You're looking along the beach of Logwood Cove along the beach. And then the part of the dune systems that is running behind, what I say behind the North Light. And right there you can see another one of those fish and wildlife signs. So, and then if you turn just a little bit more back towards the North Light, from an interesting perspective, most of the pictures are not taken from the northwest corner, more likely to be taken from the northeast corner. And if you retrace your steps up of that path, the path will come out right here at the corner of the North Light. And again, some wonderful beach plum here, and tucked in there is another survey marker. So another corner of the lot. So we won't spend too much time around the North Light. You can go out. It's a wonderful structure. As I say, I hope it will be reopened this summer for interpretation. It's a wonderful display on the bottom floor. We've just come up this path here, so we're looking back north. There's a path here that you can take down to Logwood Cove as well. So this is the western elevation, and then this is the southern elevation of the North Light. And off to its east are a couple of its outbuildings. One of these, I believe it's this building, holds the generator. There's probably a well pump in this one, although it's not potable water. This is the brick apron that the North Light Commission has been working on and selling bricks to raise funds, and it is powered now by solar panels. It has been powered in the past by wind turbine, but the shifting sands have proven too destabling for the tower of the wind turbine. And as the dunes built up, it changed how wind flows over the landscape and would go up the curve of the dune face and then affect how the blades were spinning, and it was becoming quite a problem to run the turbines out in this landscape. So they've switched over to solar panels. And they do have the backup generator, and they do have an oil furnace that, and one of these probably also holds the oil tank. And getting oil out here is quite a feat. Anyway, you can turn around and go back down the road, the main road, which we saw when we were coming in. Again, that big dune is building up over here. Take the road back. And this is probably one of the island's best place for beach plums. Now, beach plums, if you have ever picked them, you probably know they have good years and bad years, mostly bad years. So they very rarely have good beach plums. But more to the point, this place is completely among the beach plums in this area, completely netted over with poison ivy. And there's so much poison ivy that it's almost impossible for a human being to collect beach plums without suffering mightily. Birds seem to do all right, but it's tantalizing, but just not that successful a way to go. So normally, if you were walking out to the North Light and back, you would go back down this road and then head back to the parking lot. But we're gonna, I jumped ahead of myself. This is a beach plum, one of the that's in there. Get a sense of its form. Again, another very important plant for stabilizing the land. And again, this is all beach plum and poison ivy on both sides here. One last view. No, probably not the last view of the North Light. It's too much of a charismatic building to not photograph. But we've left and we're not going to stay on the road. We're going to kind of go up over the dune and just take a view. You can see Socken Pond here. You can see the path, the main shoreline back. Here are those two signs we passed early on. It probably shows the boundary between the town land and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife land. And then we start to see this back dune. And I call it a dune field. I don't think that's probably a real term, but I was just struggling with how to define this area. I'm going to go fairly quickly through some of these because I try to take several photos that would give you the sense of the breadth of this area. So going from left to right, I've just sort of moving across the landscape. It's quite a big dune field. It's taller dunes on the Saucon Pond side and the ocean side, and in between a mix of dunes, sand, beach grass, other vegetation, and it's quite an interesting area. And it's very every time I've been there, it's sort of like being in a bowl. So you are protected from the wind. It's very windless, at least the times I was there, and very peaceful. If you turn around, you get a long view of the North Light. Again, we're in an area that most people don't go and should not go. It's not good to be traipsing over on beach grass. Um, and most of the spring and summer, it is completely filled with nesting gulls, great black-backed gulls and herring gulls. So it would not be pleasant at all. But it does offer some interesting perspective and views. And again, the feeling of the landscape is quite amazing. You have lots of signs of life. A little pile of feathers in one, a pile of bones in another. Some evidence of deer print in the sand. And this is generally the area where the second lighthouse was. And there are, every once in a while, sort of some kind of artifact that presents itself. It looks like I don't know, it looks like a pedal for some kind of vehicle, whether machinery, or machine pedal or farm pedal, or I don't know, and it could not be that at all, but there it was laying on the sand, decaying. Oops. For some reason, it's not advancing. Okay, well, bear with me for a minute. Not sure why that happens, but what happens if I go sideways? There we go. If you turn around and start focusing on the Saucon Pond side, you can start seeing the view there. You see the Phragmites off to the left in this area. And here you're seeing, look, I'm looking south from the top of the dune over the Phragmites, and this is that tongue of beach sand that is blowing through from the West Beach area. It's quite interesting looking. I could not get there from where I was. I think if the water had been frozen, I could have made my way down somehow to the edge, and maybe walked over there. But I think I'm going to try to walk over there for the next presentation. Anyway, in the back, a good little pool. There's a little bit of ducks, and there's a swan there, and a little good bird watching along the way. Lots of tracks in the sand. These are mostly gull, I think, because they're webbed. But you start to see here is another good way to see that peninsula, that tongue of land that wasn't there prior to the 1991 storm. And again, see your close up again. I was quite, and it's amazing how big an area that is. Just imagine all of that was filled sand in one storm. It's quite amazing. Here it is here. You can see it also. So we're making our way back out to the shore as we should. Again, here are our sort of, these are the two markers again, sort of orienting us a little bit. You can see down the beach. One of the things I looked down, here's that deep plain of a dune that's filling in and of sand moving towards Saucon Pond. And you can see this is a rack line with a very large bold log on it. Lots of things to find. Feathers, of course, all kinds of feathers. This one is very distinctive feather. This is a body feather of a common loon, and you could tell because of the white with the dark vein. I also found this. This is a snowy owl tail, and it is attached to the last of the vertebrae. That, I guess that would be the equivalent of our coccyx. And so that would tell me that this snowy owl did not make it. And here's that log, and that was not moved. That was moved by humans. That was pushed up there. You can see various, rack lines or power lines, actually power beating force. In big storms, it can push the stones up, or a big log like this. Not that it would have floated up here, but the water would have had to be high enough for it to float. I find sometimes in nature that humans cannot just leave well enough alone. This particular log has been tagged with a little, I don't know, graffiti, and marked by some engineering person who has wedged in these very thin rocks in the seams of the log. Entertainment, I suppose. Unfortunately, we see all kinds of leftover debris from man. This is a giant pile of fishing line tangled up, and we take a close look at it. It's got all manner of color, shape, braid, thinness, monofilament, everything. Well embedded into the dune, and it's acting just like a piece of Rosa rugosa. It is there, the sand is building up in and around it and will become part of the tangle of rope as opposed to a tangle of roots that is going to hold this new section of dune. Rocks everywhere, and I would challenge anyone to take a walk on this beach and not come home without at least 2 stones in your pocket. I cannot, you'd think I'd be sick of picking up stones. I can never pick up enough. And a friend of mine always called them leverites. Leave her right there. But I seem not to be able to do that. Just view as we almost get back to the parking lot. This is very low tide. See how far up the last tide, the last high tide before this low tide came up this high. So that's a big distance to cover. This is a moderate high tide. This was just a couple of days ago. The tides right now aren't very dramatic. So they're not coming up as high as normal. But even so, comparatively, you can see that the difference between a low tide and a high tide on this beach. It gets a lot of scouring, and it's quite dramatic. But again, this is a rack line, and then there's another rack line up there. If you want to learn a little bit more about seals, I would direct you towards one of our Zoom on Natures from February 10th, 2021. It's on our website, where it was all focused on the various different seals on Block Island. This was just touching on it because of the seals that are at Sandy Point. And I never finish without a little checklist, and that Cayman eider, which I have new appreciation for, having learned recently how some of its population live year-round in Hudson Bay and Greenland, and how dependent they are on on sea urchins and open and sea ice that does not clog. They can only live year round when the sea ice, because of currents, is not complete, where there's openings. So that's a whole different story. So many thanks to Martin Creel for his amazing photographs of seals. Quite amazing. And again, this is a gray seal. I should have mentioned gray seals, you can tell because they have this long snout, like almost like a horse nose, as opposed to the harbor seals, which have a much stubbier snout, more like a puppy. So, and with that, I am happy to take questions, and thank you for your attention. And I'll stop sharing. Anybody awake? Yeah.
I am definitely. Thanks, Kim. No, that was great. Thank you so much. I have a bunch of questions, but I don't want to monopolize, but there was some comments in the chat. Let me just mention first. So George mentioned the nice mention of the garnet. And also, is the black sand due to iron in the sand?
I think I'm not exactly sure. It's all around the island, and I think, we're a glacial deposit, so things get ground down to various particle sizes. So it is just part of the sort of the glacial debris that is Block Island. And as I said, the lighter, finer stuff tends to move up to the top. It is completely magnetic. When I was a kid, we used to love to play with it because you take a magnet to the beach and you could put it on a plate and you could draw with your magnet in the black sand. So I don't really know too much more than that. I guess I just take it for granted that it is part of the Block Island shoreline. And it's hot. It's much hotter than the white sand.
So
When you're
true.
going to the beach on a sunny day, you want to stay on the white sand if possible because it is hot.
And just another thing, George mentioned that he believed the tongue of land is called a washover lobe. So
There we go. Wash over lobe.
a
I
lobe,
like
a
it.
tongue. Yeah.
I
Great.
like it. Thank you for that. I'm not sure who that was, but I like the terminology.
That was George. And I just put, if people were interested in more on the seals, the other recordings, I put in the chat the website where you can go and find all these. But yeah, so anyone have any other questions or comments?
Well, I guess.
Okay,
I'll just respond to the chat comment. Magnetite, yes. Oh, that's good, George. Thank you. Black sand was used by the early colonists. That's right. They were trying a little entrepreneurial export business of exporting the very fine black sand as a blotting substance. So when people would, when they're using pens of, nib pens, dipping the pen in the ink, they would often put some kind of blotting substance on the page to help dry up the extra sand and then shake it off. I mean, the extra ink, and shake it off. So yes, I'm not sure how long that lasted, but it certainly didn't deplete the black sand source.
Great. I just had a couple of random questions, but you were saying about the seals, the gray seals and the harbor seals, do they just don't care to mix? I mean, I hadn't really thought about they were, different locations for different ones, or
they have, I think sometimes you will see harbor seals down by the gray seals and vice versa, but it tends to be more about how they haul out. Gray seals are much bigger than harbor seals, and they seem to prefer the big, flat, open expanse and huddle together. Whereas and I guess they have protection by being in a big group. Whereas the harbor seals tend to haul out and rest on top of a boulder in the water. but
Mm.
out of the water. I mean, not on the shoreline. So they're protected by being isolated, like on an island, stoned kind of thing, or a couple. So I think it might just have as much to do with sort of their preference, their sort of innate preference for how they haul out. And seals haul out daily, if possible, usually at low tide, to rest and to warm up. So depending on the wind direction and the weather, you are more likely to find seals in one place than the other. For instance, if there's a big sea on coming out of the southeast, you're not as likely to find the harbor seals hauled out at Spring Street. And if it's a big sea out of the northwest, you're not as likely to see them hauled out at the North Light, at Sandy Point. We have an ongoing seal survey project going out here, if anybody's interested in that, where we're working with the same protocol as Save the Bay to, which means the same time period, to monitor the seals in the wintertime and in a few key locations. Sandy Point being one, the rocks at the southeast point behind the Parish Center, and the Great Salt Pond on the docks of Cormorant Cove. So I think that all might be covered in the seal presentation.
Mhm.
Or you could come on and walk this weekend.
Yes, for those that are here, Kim was actually going to do a live walk this Saturday.
At Sandy Point.
At Sandy Point. And you're brushed up on all your history from, but it was fascinating, Kim. Thank you. Weaving in all like the historical parts with the lighthouse. It was, quite fascinating. Yeah, so if anyone has any other questions, that'd be great. Otherwise, we could say goodbye until next time.
Great.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Charlotte, thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
George.
Yeah, thanks for your input.
Thanks for all the geology today. That was fun.
Well, you're the geologist. I gotta learn from you.
Exactly. All righty. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.